Well, hey everyone, thank you for joining us on Weekend Extra. Well, hey everyone, thanks for joining us on Weekend Extra. My name is Rich, and I'm here with Pastor Todd. Todd, we just finished this last conversation on regardless of circumstance.
Yeah.
And you were talking on joy. And it was, what a great message, first off. But it seems like that's something that's very personal to you. And so I'd like to know, how's your life been in navigating this? And the research that you did for this message, was that all just for this, or have you had some life circumstances leading up to this for it?
For sure, Rich. I tell you, I've so appreciated this series. Excuse me. This series has been really helpful because, let's be honest, the circumstances, I always appreciated what Jeff said. Like, it's not a matter of if crisis will hit, it'll be when. Right? But not to focus on the crisis, but rather Christ, and allow that to define us. And I think that has been so good to remember in the midst of all that's been going on. And so as we think about joy, right, it's a response. It's the response that we can acquire and develop within the midst of what we're experiencing. And so for me personally, this has been I think something that I have wrestled with. And I shared that a little bit. Like, this is something that I almost not mocked, but I just couldn't grasp the idea of how do I consider joy in the midst of the circumstances, the trials that we face. And so it is personal for me. Yeah. And it's still a battle. It's still something that I wrestle with of okay, so in the midst of what I'm experiencing at this moment, how do I consider joy, right? And I think it's important to remember that joy is not an emotion, it's a mindset. Mm-hmm. And so wrapping our minds around what life is like in the midst of the circumstance, how do we find joy? And it points us towards Christ, right? And in the midst of our minds thinking about Jesus and what he's done for us, I think joy is an outcome of that and the ability to experience joy in those trials.
That is so good. I keep thinking the Christian life that we live, some people are thinking, oh, I must be doing something wrong if I've got these feelings of pain or frustration, am I not a good enough Christian? And it's none of that. It's like you said, it's the mindset. So that would lead me to my next question. So we talked about finding the joy. Would that also mean to say finding the joy is the same as denying the pain?
That's interesting. It was fun to be able to illustrate this a little bit with popcorn. Who knew that burnt popcorn could be an illustration, right? But I think it does give us a good picture, right? Because we can disregard the bag of popcorn entirely because we knew we burnt it. Mm-hmm. But really, still within the bag, there is some good. And to be able to experience the goodness and finding joy, we get to experience the goodness of what Christ is doing in our lives. And so I don't believe it's denying the pain, right? Because pain is natural. It's an emotion that we experience, mm-hmm. right? And so the experiences we face, we're going to get hit with a whirlwind of different emotions, right? And so I don't think we should disregard the pain. I talked about how we can navigate life sometimes by putting on the mask of joy. Mm-hmm. And I think what I mean by that is we don't want to give people the idea that we're hurting, we're broken.
Yeah.
Right? And so we'll put this joy that we're happy-go-lucky all the time so that people don't see what's really happening behind us. And I say that's still a burnt piece of popcorn, right? We can smother it with butter and to make it taste better, but the truth is it's still burnt.
Right.
And I think we have to deal with what we're really working with in the circumstance that we're facing. Personally, for me, pain and grief had to be dealt with. I needed to go through the processes of grief in the loss of my grandfather and the loss of my mom. And so, but it's normal. I can't disregard it. It was a process that I had to come through. But developing and acquiring the mindset of joy, it's actually knowing that the Lord is still very much at work in the midst of the trials, even the pain. So it's a mindset shift a little bit.
No, I think that's great. We had been talking, earlier this week about Ecclesiastes 2, where it says, there's a time for all of these, a time to weep, time for joy, time for pain. And so maybe for someone watching, they're like, I am in that season. I want the joy. I feel it, but I'm kind of in this time where I am mourning over something or a loss or a divorce or so if they're in that time of pain, how do you move forward?
Right.
What would be the next step for them?
Well, I think the first step, and you mentioned this, it's almost admitting and coming to grips that you're at a place where you might need help, right? And it's resources that are available for us. I know for me personally, when I was in the midst of these trials, I was encouraged to seek counseling, right? And it's amazing sometimes when we think of counseling that it's a negative thing, and it's really not. It's actually processing and getting almost to the surface of what's happening in our hearts and in our minds. And beginning to put it out on the table is the beginning steps of almost experiencing healing in those moments of pain. And so I think it's really important to come to terms with what you're facing and take the step of boldness to receive help and find a community. You know, for me, it's like, oh man, I needed to lean in on brothers of mine, friends of mine who could support me during my time of pain. You know, and so finding a community, I also think is really important.
Yeah, that was actually my next question. So, like, let's say, what would be my role as, like, I'm seeing like a brother in Christ, struggling, going through a time of pain. Like, what would be that role of that Christian brotherhood, that Christian community? You know, that's something that we as Grace and probably the Big C Church, like, that's our thing. You know, that community. So, what is our role to help someone in pain?
Yeah, I think it's coming around them. You know, I think it's being an avenue for them to explore on how to experience a way of dealing with the pain and the grief in a healthy way, right? And let's be honest, I know we're focusing in on the pain because that has something to do with the story that I shared, but it's all circumstances, right? I think linking arms with other people and as a church of having a community that can develop where we can just navigate this thing, maybe it's confusing times, maybe it's joyous times, right? Even when things are good, let's celebrate together. Community is so important because I think also in that community, it helps us point back to the very purpose and the very reason or the very source of where that joy comes from. That's Christ. So let's remember him. Let's talk about what he's done for us because it helps us almost get back on track of understanding like how to navigate our circumstances and seeking joy and considering it in those moments.
That's awesome. Man, well, I so appreciate you sharing a deeply personal time in your life to help connect us through this and to do it on your birthday, no less.
Yeah,
so,
it was fun.
Mr. Todd, his birthday today, so wherever you are, you just like give him a nice little clap. But thanks for joining with us for this. And as you're watching, if you're like, man, this is the first message in this regardless of circumstances, where can I find more? You can find that online. Go ahead and check out all of the messages in that series. I think it'd be very, very great for you. So again, my name is Rich. This is Pastor Todd. And this is Weekend Extra. Have a great evening, day, whatever it is that you're watching this on.